You're listening to the Corbett Report.
I think that there's the danger in this type of conversation of extrapolating from our own personal experience and personal psychology and then wondering why everyone else isn't quite like that. And I think we have to approach this from a more scientific approach. And there are scientific ways to approach this question of why people basically give up. And I'd point to some research that was conducted at University of Pennsylvania, I believe, in 1967 by Martin Seligman, who did a famous set of experiments. He was in the Skinnerian behavioral conditioning school of thought. And so he was doing conditioning experiments with dogs, including experiments that involved giving dogs electric shocks. So experiments that probably would not be conducted any longer. But at any rate, at that time, what they did was they took 3 different groups of dogs. The first group were simply restrained in a harness and then let go after a period of time. The second and third groups consisted of yoked pairs of dogs, so that a dog in group 2 was attached to a dog in group 3 via an electronic device or what have you, so that they were not only harnessed, but they were actually delivered electric shocks. Now, the dogs in group 2 could end the shock by pressing a lever. The dogs in group 3 had a lever, but the lever did nothing. It did not stop the shocks. So for the dogs in group 2, the shock came and they could press the lever and end it. So there was a clear sort of connection between their action and the ending of the shock. For the dogs in group 3, it seemed completely random to them whether they could stop the shock when it came, when it ended, so that it was completely out of their control. After the experiment, they discovered that the dogs in group 1 and 2 actually recovered quite quickly from the event, but the dogs in group 3 showed signs of chronic depression. So what they then did was they took these 3 groups of dogs and they put them all equally into this fenced area with a low barrier around the floor. The floor was electrified so that they could deliver shocks through the floor. But the dogs could quite easily jump over the little barrier that they placed around it and get out of the way of the shocks. The group 1 and 2 dogs invariably would jump out of the way of the shock. The group 3 dogs actually lied down passively and started whining, taking the shocks when they could quite easily avoid them. And that was interesting and quite a startling result because it went against sort of the tenets of Skinnerian behavioral cognitive models. But perhaps not that surprising for the social engineers who have known for a very long time, for example, that you can restrain a 10,000-pound adult elephant with a puny little rope, not because the elephant can't break the rope, but because they have been trained since birth with heavy chains, tying them up since the time they were very small, that they can't break free of their harness, so that when they actually get big enough that they could quite easily do it, they don't even try to do it. This is, again, a very, very common thing among many different species, and of course, humans fundamentally no different. We can be trained into what this is called learned helplessness, and we can be trained into that by simply being in situations where nothing we do seems to actually affect anything. We have a lever, but it does absolutely nothing. And I think that's a perfect model for what happens in our representative democracies, where basically we have the lever of the voting booth, and it does absolutely nothing. You can vote for Team Bush or Team Obama, and the same drone killings, the same unconstitutional wiretapping, and all of this continues to go on, and people arrive at that point of learned helplessness. Nothing they do can make any difference. Now, Martin Seligman actually went on to develop a theory of learned optimism. He basically split humanity into pessimists and optimists, and he developed a test that you can take online to determine whether you are fundamentally optimistic or pessimistic. And he found that the pessimistic were by far the majority, and people who were more likely to be prone to depression. And he linked that with that cognitive model of people who basically feel that whatever happens, it's their fault and there's nothing they can do to get out of it. And so he proposed a model of learned optimism in which he speculated that you can actually train yourself, and provided some research to back this up, you can actually train yourself to become more optimistic and thus more in control of your own actions and the effects that they cause. And basically this was an ABC model of cognitive understanding of adverse events. Adversity, belief, and consequence. So if, and the example on Wikipedia, if someone cuts you off in traffic, that's the adversity. The belief is, oh, what an idiot, he's so selfish, he's so rude. The consequence, you become angry and you start yelling profanities at the other driver, which is an experience I'm sure we can all relate to, me personally as well. But he proposes to add a couple of extra letters to that ABC model. D, disputation, where you start questioning your negative beliefs about that and what caused it and what you can do about it. And then E, energization, which means that you can actually then positively overcome that situation by basically becoming conscious of your own reactions and trying to work around them. Now, there's debate about his own learned optimism model, but I think at any rate it provides us some context to this that I think puts it in a very clear way that this is not something that's only an American phenomenon or even a human phenomenon, but I think a phenomenon that transcends species, and it relates not just to brainwashing. It's not just brainwashing, although of course there's the media social conditioning element to it, but I think it's a cultural milieu. It's an entire context, an interlocking web of social and political institutions that make it so that it seems that nothing we do actually matters. And when we are subjected to that for long enough, we basically give up, and we have to relearn how to process that information and then how to basically overcome it. And again, we can talk about how to do that, but I think that's the framework that I would put this in.